December 17, 1944, 0530 hours. Honsfeld, Belgium. The Tiger tank's engine coughed, sputtered, then died. SS Obersto Banora Joachim Peiper slammed his fist against the turret hatch, the metallic clang echoing through the pre-dawn darkness. His driver, Unschar Weber, attempted to restart the 700 horsepower Maybach engine. Nothing. The fuel gauge read empty. Herr Oberinure Weber called up from his compartment, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. The reserve tank is also dry. Peiper climbed down from his command tank, his boots crunching on the frozen Belgian soil. Around him, the most powerful armored spearhead the Wehrmacht had assembled for Operation Watch on the Rhine, the Ardennes offensive, sat motionless. 67 tanks, 149 half-tracks, and nearly 5,000 of Germany's most elite Waffen-SS soldiers, all paralyzed by empty fuel tanks. Through the morning mist, Peiper could see the abandoned American position ahead, Honsfeld, a critical supply depot for the U.S. 99th Infantry Division. The Americans had fled so quickly they'd left fires still burning in oil drums, coffee still hot in metal cups, and there, lined up like a gift from the god of war himself, stood rows upon rows of jerry cans, thousands of them, the distinctive olive-drab American fuel containers. Peiper approached slowly, almost reverently. His adjutant Halpetum Führer Hans Gruller pried open one can and sniffed benzene Herr Oschan for a high-octane gasoline as his men began the frantic work of refueling their vehicles. Peiper walked among the stockpile counting. The mathematics were staggering. 50,000 gallons, enough to fuel his entire Kampfgruppe for the push to the Meuse River, enough to potentially change the course of the offensive. The Americans had abandoned more fuel in this single depot than most German divisions had received in the past 6 months. But as Peiper stood among this bounty, watching his men pour American fuel into German tanks, a crushing realization settled over him like the morning fog. If the Americans could afford to abandon such quantities, if they could leave behind what Germany would guard with entire divisions, then this war was already over. Germany hadn't just miscalculated, Germany had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of its enemy. 6 months before Peiper's discovery at Honsfeld in June 1944, Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments and War Production, had presented the Führer with a report that should have ended all offensive operations immediately. Germany's synthetic fuel production, the lifeblood of the Wehrmacht, had been systematically destroyed by Allied bombing. The Leuna works, which had produced 175,000 tons of fuel in April, managed only 5,000 tons by September. The Burgues hydrogenation plants at Pitz, Le Hammer, and Brooks were operating at less than 10% capacity. The numbers told a story of inevitable defeat. In 1944, the United States produced 1.8 billion barrels of crude oil. Germany, including all synthetic production, and captured Romanian fields, managed 33 million barrels, less than 2% of American production. The Third Reich was attempting to wage mechanized warfare with horse-drawn logistics. While America was drowning its armies in petroleum abundance, Major Friedrich Simon of the Wehrmacht's Logistics Command had calculated that the Ardennes offensive would require 4.5 million gallons of fuel to reach Antwerp. Hitler allocated 5 million gallons, but only half was actually delivered due to transportation problems. The German High Command was betting the entire offensive on capturing enemy supplies, a strategy that revealed terminal weakness rather than strength. The Americans, meanwhile, had constructed a petroleum pipeline system across France called PLU, Pipeline Under the Ocean, and the Red Ball Express, a massive truck convoy system that delivered 12,500 tons of supplies daily to the front lines. By December 1944, American forces in Europe were consuming 1.2 million gallons of fuel per day and receiving 1.4 million gallons. They were accumulating reserves while fighting. Joachim Peiper was not a fool. At 29, he was one of the youngest regimental commanders in the Waffen-SS, holder of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords, veteran of the Eastern Front, where he had learned that in modern warfare, fuel was more precious than ammunition. His Kampfgruppe had been designated the Schwerpunkt, the decisive point of the entire Ardennes offensive. On December 14, 2 days before the offensive, Peiper attended the final briefing at Tondorf. General Sepp Dietrich, commanding the 6th SS Panzer Army, was blunt. "You will have enough fuel to reach the Meuse if you capture American supplies. The fuel allocation for Kampfgruppe Peiper was 31,000 gallons, enough for 50 miles of combat operations. The distance to the Meuse was 65 miles. The mathematics of failure were built into the plan from the beginning. As his column prepared to advance on December 16, Peiper issued strict orders. Tanks would operate in single file to conserve fuel. Engines would be shut off during any halt longer than 5 minutes, and the capture of American fuel dumps was priority 1, above even tactical objectives. The contrast with American operations could not have been starker. That same morning, Captain James Rose of the U.S. 743 Road Tank Battalion, stationed just 20 miles from Peiper's starting position, recorded in his unit diary. Received fuel resupply 8,000 grams. Third delivery this week, storage tanks already at capacity. December 16, 1944, 0530 hours. The German artillery barrage that opened Operation Watch on the Rhine used more ammunition in 2 hours than the Wehrmacht had allocated for entire operations earlier in the war. But even this impressive display masked critical shortages. Peiper's column began moving at 7 a.m. already behind schedule. The roads, which on German maps appeared as highways, were narrow country lanes, many unpaved. Within hours, traffic jams developed as vehicles designed for the Russian steppes struggled through the Ardennes forest. At Lanzarote, Peiper's first objective, they encountered unexpected resistance from a single American intelligence and reconnaissance platoon. 18 men who held up the most powerful German armored column for nearly 10 hours. During the delay, Peiper's vehicles sat idling, burning precious fuel. When they finally broke through and reached Honsfeld at dawn on December 17, Peiper's column had covered 20 miles and consumed 40% of their fuel. At this rate, they would run dry before reaching the halfway point to the MOS. The American supply depot at Honsfeld was not even a primary facility. It was a forward supply point for the 99th Infantry Division, what the U.S. Army classified as a Class 3B depot, a temporary fuel station. Yet what Peiper found there exceeded the monthly fuel allocation for an entire German Panzer division. Führer Hans Gruller later testified, "We found pyramids of jerry cans, each containing 5 gall of gasoline. They were stacked 3 meters high, extending for perhaps 200 meters. The Americans had not even attempted to destroy them. The captured fuel was high-octane aviation gasoline mixed with motor fuel 80 octane or higher." German vehicles, especially the temperamental Maybach engines in the Tiger tanks, were designed for 74-octane fuel. The American gasoline was actually too good, causing engine problems in several German vehicles. As Peiper's men refueled, they made more discoveries. Sergeant Wilhelm Hoffmann found shipping manifests in the depot office. He could read English, having worked in his father's import business before the war. The papers indicated this fuel had been shipped from Texas to New York, across the Atlantic to Liverpool, across the Channel to Normandy, and trucked 400 meters to Honsfeld. The journey of over 6,000 miles had taken less than 6 weeks. "I showed the papers to Oberstbandführer Peiper," Hoffmann recalled in a 1976 interview. "He read them twice, then crumpled them up. He said nothing, but his face went pale. We both understood what this meant." Private Ernst Kara found a stack of Stars and Stripes newspapers dated December 15, just 2 days old. The headline celebrated the opening of a new fuel pipeline from Cherbourg to Verdun capable of delivering 300,000 gallons per day. A single pipeline delivering more fuel daily than Kampfgruppe Peiper would use in the entire offensive. To comprehend the shock of Peiper's discovery, one must understand Germany's fuel situation by late 1944. Since May, Allied bombing had reduced synthetic fuel production by 90%. The Luftwaffe was grounding aircraft for lack of aviation fuel. Pilot training had been cut from 250 flight hours to 60 hours. The German Navy's surface fleet had effectively ceased operations. U-boats were fitted with snorkels to conserve diesel by running on batteries longer. On the home front, German civilians had not seen private automobile traffic since 1942. Gasoline was so precious that the Gestapo investigated black market theft of individual liters. Farmers were returning to horse-drawn plows. Meanwhile, the United States was producing 67% of the world's oil. The East Texas oil field alone produced more petroleum than all of German-occupied Europe. American refineries were operating at such capacity that Standard Oil was experimenting with new petroleum byproducts simply because they had excess crude. With the 50,000 gallons captured at Honsfeld, Peiper's column surged forward. They reached Billingen by noon on December 17, capturing additional supplies, rations, ammunition, and most importantly, maps showing other American fuel depots in the area. But the maps revealed a disturbing truth. The Americans had fuel stockpiles everywhere. Every major crossroads had a depot. The U.S. First Army alone had 3.5 million gallons in reserve. Peiper pushed on to Lineville, where his forces would commit the Malmedy massacre, killing 84 American prisoners. Even this war crime was connected to fuel desperation. Peiper later claimed he could not spare gasoline to transport prisoners. By evening on December 17, Peiper's spearhead reached Stavelo, site of a major American fuel depot containing over 2 million gallons. Here was enough fuel to guarantee reaching the Meuse. But as the first German vehicles approached, American engineers were already at work. Captain John Brewster of the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion had received warning of the German approach. His orders were simple: deny fuel to the enemy at all costs. The Stavelo depot contained 2,189,000 gallons of gasoline in jerry cans stacked across 15 acres. At 16:30 on December 17, as Peiper's advanced guard approached, Captain Brewster gave the order. Engineers poured gasoline trails between the stacks. White phosphorus grenades were distributed. Technical Sergeant Paul Solis threw the first grenade. The explosion was immediate and tremendous, he recalled. A wall of fire shot up maybe 100 feet. Within minutes, the entire depot was an inferno. Peiper's lead tanks arrived to find a pillar of black smoke rising 1,000 feet into the sky. The fire would burn for 3 days, consuming enough fuel to have powered Peiper's entire division to Antwerp and back. Unterführer Weber described the scene. The Oberschirmführer stood on his tank turret watching the flames. He said nothing for perhaps 5 minutes. Then he climbed down and told me they can afford to burn 2 million gallons to deny them to us. What are we doing here? Across the Ardennes, American engineers were destroying fuel dumps rather than risk capture. At Tuapon, 1.1 million gallons burned. At Spar, 2.5 million gallons were destroyed. In total, Americans deliberately destroyed over 8 million gallons during the first week, more than Germany had allocated for the entire operation. The ability to casually destroy millions of gallons was rooted in a supply system beyond German comprehension. The Red Ball Express had delivered 412,000 tons of supplies using 6,000 trucks operating round the clock. Each truck consumed 40 gall daily. The operation itself burned more fuel than German Army Group B received monthly. By December 1944, the Motor Transport Service employed 230 truck companies operating on color-coded routes. The system delivered 20,000 tons of supplies daily, including 3,000 tons of fuel. Colonel James Snyder, Chief Logistics Officer for 1st Army, recorded on December 18. Fuel receipts yesterday 1,847,000 gallons. Fuel issued 1,623,000 gall. Net gain to reserves 224,000 gall. The pipeline system was even more impressive. Operation Pluto had laid pipes across the English Channel, pumping 1 million gallons daily from Britain. A network of pipelines extended inland. The Cherbourg-Paris line delivered 800,000 gallons daily. The Seine line moved 650,000 gall. By December 1944, Allied forces in Northwest Europe were consuming 7.5 million gallons daily while receiving 8.22 million gallons. They were building reserves during offensive operations. As Peiper pushed deeper into Belgium on December 18, the impossibility of the German position became clear. At Char, they captured another depot. 5,000 gallons consumed in 3 hours of combat. Tiger tanks consumed 2.5 gall per mile in battle. Panthers burned 1.5 gall per mile. In the difficult Ardennes terrain, consumption increased by 40%. Helped Otto Dingler, maintenance officer for the 1st SS Panzer Regiment, recorded, by noon on December 18, we had consumed 67,000 gallons since the offensive began. We had captured perhaps 55,000 gallons. We were operating at a deficit. The Americans monitoring German radio traffic through ultra-intercepts knew Peiper's fuel situation. General Courtney Hodges ordered all units. Enemy critically short of fuel. Destroy all gasoline stocks threatened by capture. That same day, American C-47s flew 316 sorties delivering supplies to Bastonia, including 160,000 gal of fuel. Americans were flying more fuel to a surrounded garrison than Peiper's entire Kampfgruppe possessed. By December 19, as Peiper's forces engaged defenders at Stoumont, the fuel crisis had become critical. Tanks were being abandoned with empty fuel tanks rather than from battle damage. Peiper consolidated his remaining fuel, perhaps 8,000 gallons, enough for one engagement or retreat, but not both. Meanwhile, Allied planners were preparing for January operations. Brigadier General Maurice Gilland requested 245 million gallons for the coming month. The request was approved without discussion. The contrast extended beyond quantity. American vehicles were standardized for efficiency. Sherman tanks consumed 0.8 gal per mile versus the Tiger's 2.5. American trucks got 8 meters per gallon fully loaded. Parts were interchangeable, maintenance simplified. German forces operated a bewildering array of captured and manufactured vehicles with different requirements. French tanks needed different oil than German Panthers. Soviet trucks required different parts than German Opels. Each complication multiplied logistical difficulties. On December 20, Peiper received a radio message. Fuel convoy destroyed by Allied aircraft. No resupply possible. Continue with available resources. Peiper called his commanders together. Sternbanführer Vera Pertka was blunt. We have fuel for perhaps 20 kilometers. The Meuse is 30 kilometers away. According to H.T. Murat-Gruller's testimony, the Oberscharmbannführer said, "Gentlemen, we have discovered we are fighting an enemy who burns more fuel to deny it to us than we received for this entire operation. What we captured at Honsfeld, which seemed miraculous, was nothing to them. We cannot win." This realization was spreading. General Hasso von Manteuffel commanding 5th Panzer Army later wrote, "When I learned Americans had destroyed 8 million gallons rather than risk our capturing it, I knew the offensive had failed before it began." Colonel Friedrich Fondonder, captured December 23, told interrogators, "Your soldiers throw away chocolate. My men haven't seen chocolate in 2 years. You burn millions of gallons. We measure by the liter. How can we fight such abundance?" By December 21, Peiper was surrounded at Lays, his tanks immobile. American forces surrounding him, 31st Infantry Division, 82nd Airborne, 3rd Armored, had a combined fuel allocation of 340,000 gallons for December 21 alone. Peiper had perhaps 1,000 gallons. Private First Class Richard McKinney wrote home, "We've got Germans surrounded who ran out of gas. Our captain jokes we use more fuel heating coffee than they have for tanks." The American response demonstrated industrial warfare at its peak. Patton's 3rd Army pivot north required 350,000 gallons just for redeployment. Considered impossible by German standards, yet accomplished in 3 days. December 23 brought clear weather. Allied aircraft flew 2,000 sorties, each burning fuel at rates that would have grounded the Luftwaffe for weeks. P-47s consumed 300 gal per hour. B-26s burned 200 gal hourly. One day's air operations consumed more than Germany's entire offensive allocation. On the night of December 23 to 24, Peiper abandoned his vehicles and escaped on foot. Of 119 tanks and assault guns that began the offensive, 39 remained operational but immobilized. These were destroyed with remaining ammunition. A Bereiter Heinz Goals described the scene. "We drained the last fuel from all vehicles, maybe 200 gal total. The Oberstufenführer personally destroyed his command tank. Millions of Reichmarks of equipment destroyed by empty fuel tanks. Of 5,000 men who began with Kampfgruppe Peiper, approximately 770 returned. They had advanced 60 miles, captured several depots, and discovered the truth about Allied logistics." News of Peiper's discoveries spread rapidly through German command. On December 26, Field Marshal Walter Model received reports on captured American supplies. His chief of staff recorded Model's reaction. The field marshal read the quantities twice. 50,000 gallons at Honsfeld, 2 million burned at Stavelot, 8 million destroyed rather than captured. He said, "We are not fighting the same war." Hitler informed December 28 refused to accept reality. Speer wrote, Hitler insisted the numbers were propaganda. When shown photographs of burning Stavolo, he claimed it was Hollywood effects, but lower ranks understood. Greer Wilhelm Hoffman wrote his wife, "Americans destroy more fuel daily than we receive monthly. They drive tanks like we march. This war is